We've got our panel coming up in a moment. Before we get there, today's question time tactics confirmed a trend spilling over from yesterday. The opposition's intent on directing many more questions towards Anthony Albanese on the Voice referendum. Deputy Leader Susan Lee led out, quoting the words of disappointed Indigenous Yes campaigners, quoting those right back to the Prime Minister.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns the reaction from Indigenous leaders to the Prime Minister's dismal response to his referendum failure. Alira Davis, an Uluru Dialogue member, said, and I quote, "The PM is moving on tonight. He just wants to go to Washington and prepare for re-election, and we are just a blip." Sally Scales, a member of the First Nations Referendum Working Group, said, "The PM was insulting and pathetic. How dare he? A cop-out." Does the Prime Minister remain committed to treaty and truth-telling?
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition would have you believe, through asking that question, that the people who have spent a lifetime campaigning for constitutional recognition of First Australians, who are understandably disappointed by the result.
The member for
What I have said is that
members on my left.
What I have said is I respect the decision that was made by the Australian people. On that basis, some people who've campaigned very strongly for it are not happy with that response. But I made it very clear before the election that I would respect the outcome, and I've made it after as well. I will show respect to those people. The Deputy Leader shows none.
OK, well, to talk more about The Voice and perhaps other issues if we have time, let's bring in our political panel. Joining us, Liberal MP and member for Sturt, James Stephens. Welcome back, James. And Labor MP, the member for Higgins, Michelle Ananda-Rajah. Welcome to you too, Michelle. Now, I might go to you, James, somewhat unusually, because I think in an inner metro seat, not dissimilar in some ways to Michelle's seat of Higgins, I put to you at one point in the campaign that you might have been out of touch with your electorate. Not so. 58% voted no in your electorate. When did you get the sense that this was going that way from your electorate's point of view?
Look, Greg, for a long time I felt the view of my electorate was essentially the same as my own, which was we were looking to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. We were looking for practical solutions to the challenges of Indigenous disadvantage, but we're not convinced that the voice to Parliament in the Constitution was the right way to go about it. And, I feel that I was reflecting what I was hearing from my constituency, but it happened to be in line, obviously, with my own views. And, I'm gratified that I was in touch with where my electorate stood on this matter, but still very disappointed at the place we find ourselves in as a nation, because I don't think my electorate wanted to go through this referendum. I think people are very disappointed at the broken nation that we have at the end of it.
All right, I'll follow up on some questions about that. But Michelle, I suppose mirror reverse for you, a similar result at 60% yes in Higgins. It was, though, perhaps at the expense of outer metropolitan seats. Would you agree? What do you think of that criticism that says too much effort was put into areas that turn out to be safe yes voting electorates like your own? Was that at the expense of other parts of the nation?
I think it fell to the responsibility of each sitting member to run their own race, and I took it upon myself in my electorate to really spend a lot of time speaking to people and explaining what this meant. And so hence we ended up with a result which was a resolute yes from Higgins. On the night, 2 out of 3 constituents had voted yes. It's extraordinary. We were the 8th highest vote in the country. But I don't think that is what we need to focus on. We respect the result of the Australian people. What they have said here is that they have rejected a very specific question. But what I do understand, and this I know from having spent 2 weeks on pre-poll every single day, watching people go by, listening to their commentary, is that they wholeheartedly are united behind the principle of closing the gap. They want to see self-determination for Indigenous Australians. They want to see agency delivered to them. but they want us to find another way, and that is what we are now focused on.
All right, we might even explore again what the mechanism is for doing that. But to your point about division, James, we played that section of Question Time where it's a tactical choice by the coalition this week to hammer home referendum failings to the Prime Minister. How does that not exacerbate divisions right now?
I don't think we could be more divided. Since Saturday, nothing that happens in Question Time could make anything worse than it already is. And the Prime Minister is responsible for that. He chose the terms of this contest. He chose not to achieve bipartisanship around a referendum proposal. His decisions led to the outcome on the weekend, and we in the coalition are as angry as the general public that we've been through this process to get the outcome that we had on the weekend. No one wanted, I'm sure even the Prime Minister would say in hindsight, he wishes he didn't do what he's done. He's the Prime Minister. He's responsible for this, and he should apologise for his conduct in taking us to where we are right now.
All right. To the organisational changes that are needed to close the gap, Michelle, we're not going to have a voice. What is the body that will be charged, federally at least, in driving that forward from here?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing is we need to let the dust settle. We need to also acknowledge the deep hurt and disappointment that many Indigenous Australians feel right now. They are really in anguish. And also acknowledge the disappointment amongst many non-Indigenous Australians who voted yes on the day, but also who have been campaigning for decades, advocating for decades, including the Shadow Attorney General, Julian Leeser, and others. So I think that's the first thing. And the second is that if we circle back to first principles, we need to listen. We've always said we need to listen to Indigenous Australians, and that's what they have told us over decades. So
Could there be some network of,
Maybe.
I don't like using the phrase, but local and regional voices?
Right. So
like
I think we need to be guided by Indigenous Australians, and they are, as you know, going through a period of mourning now, which they describe as a week of silence, and then they will emerge and they will hopefully then come round. We will sit down with them and work out what the next steps are. But we already have, structures that are operating, a structure that is operating in Victoria very successfully. I think we can certainly look to models that are being set up at state level to see what the next steps forward might look like.
And are you comfortable with those? They're already underway in your home state of South Australia. James, do you see that as the mechanism to primarily address disadvantage, closing the gap, or are we going to have to come up with something new and different federally?
Yeah, well, look, I think the consensus through this campaign was the status quo is completely failing. So I wouldn't want to double down on that failure whatsoever. People campaigning for yes were saying the systems in place are not working. So if the silver lining out of this was that we've got consensus that these structures, the committees, all the bodies that get all the money poured in like a big funnel that just drips out the other end to actual service delivery on the ground can be broken apart, then that will be one small mercy out of this experience that we've had since Saturday. But I don't want to double down on failure. I don't want to look to models that already exist because the consensus during the campaign was that they're not working.